in Clive Palmer now, I guess, this afternoon. I don't want to get to politics, but that's happened in your electorate.
That's right. Yeah.
There's always going to be knee-jerk suggestions after something like this. But rugby league, I guess one of the ideas is headgear and whether that should be compulsory. I mean, do you have any thoughts on when something like this happens?
Well, I think in the old days they always used to have headgear, shoulder pads and things like that, and it doesn't really hurt to look at that situation, really, because we've got to put people's lives ahead of anything else.
Yeah, some sad news, though, no doubt about that. Let's move on to what's been happening here in Canberra. Your question was ruled out by the Speaker this afternoon. You were asking about the citizenship laws that we'll see the detail on tomorrow or the next day. What do you think, from what you've heard, what do you think about what the government's suggesting? Well,
I think all of Australians support the fact that we don't want people in foreign armies or in foreign organisations fighting against our defence force. There's no question about that. So the real issue is how is that determined? Like I said today that in 2009, Malcolm Turnbull lost the Liberal leadership because a Treasury official lied to the Senate about Watergate at the time. I said, is it okay for an Australian to lose their citizenship if a Treasury official or someone else lies? And he's got no say in it or he doesn't know what's happening. And we need to have a process which is transparent and which all Australians' rights are not diminished.
I guess the difficulty with a national security matter where you've got spy agencies collecting information on what an Australian involved in terrorism has done, you don't necessarily want all of that made public, do you?
Well, that's true, but of course it could be someone going to Athens on holiday with their family and some spy bureaucrat decides he could be a terrorist and sends that back to Australia and he can never come back to Australia because there's a misunderstanding.
So is your bottom line there must be a court conviction before anyone loses their citizenship?
Well, that's what the Magna Carta said. Once the king could chop your head off just because he felt like it. And they had the Magna Carta 800 years ago because they decided that, the barons decided that before the king chopped your head off, even though you deserved to have your head chopped off, you had a right to know why it was being chopped off and had a chance to correct any mistakes or misinformation. It's only a minor thing, really. It could be done overseas if people are overseas. It could be done on, we could have a website where people could access from overseas. We could use Skype.
How would that work? A website to convict someone?
You can say, look, these people we believe should lose their citizenship and they will in 6 months' time. But if in the meantime there's a mistake or there's some reason why they shouldn't, they've got an opportunity to be able to know in the next 6 months. And anyone that thought they're in that position could put a submission forward if there's a mistake or if it's not based on any evidence.
And then a judge would decide.
Well, a judge could decide that here in Australia.
Would monitor the discussion online.
He could make contacts, make submissions, make a determination. But the other question that Nick Xenophon raised, which is really true, if you've got people out there that are dangerous to Australia, could do damage to Australians, you don't want them doing that to Australians overseas. Far better to bring them back here and deal with them in our penal system.
But again, don't you get back to the central point that the prosecution case against someone involved in terrorism may well involve human intelligence sources, people you don't necessarily want to expose?
Well, it could, but the point about it may not as well. We've seen a lot of situations that we go back to Watergate where a lot of this stuff was used for national security, which had no substance. We look at the Church Committee in the US Senate in 1974, probably before you were born, David.
74 was a good year. That was.
It tells you all about that sort of thing. So I think we've got to have the system that protects all Australians. No one's. Everyone would agree with the Prime Minister what the sanction should be. The question is, we've got to make sure that we don't let ISIS and Daesh do real damage to our system. If they change the way we live, if they take away our institutions and we compromise those just because of them, they're really calling the shots. We want to be calling the shots.
Let's go to a few other policy matters. Today's debate about whether some wealthy families should pay for kids to go to public schools. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's been an attack our education system by the government since day one. With the university fees, there's a whole range of things that are consistent. I mean, really, the Australian government now has got 14% debt. Bob Menzies had 40% debt. We can afford to maintain our standard of living. After all, we had the fastest growing GDP for 23 years based on our education system. And we've got a 102% participation rate, the highest in the world in universities. So why don't we want to cherish our education system because it's providing...
But as a principle, we pay for university one way or another through HECS or upfront. What about schools? Should those who can afford pay something?
Well, if you have a look at the situation we do with our taxation system, we have a progressive taxation, so the rich pay more tax. than the poorer, and so it should be. And that's how it works out. In my electorate in Nambour, we've got 15 kids at the Nambour High School that are staying there to finish their education because they want to, because they come from broken families and things like that. Certainly, we, as Australians, we want to support our young people, have the best education in the world.
Can I turn to the tax debate? We're going to be talking to the South Australian Premier shortly on this. He's put forward the idea of extending the GST to financial services. Would that be a good way of raising a few extra dollars?
Well, the best way of raising extra dollars is by growth and increasing your revenue, increasing your economic activity. It's often hard for politicians to look at that, but if we can increase basic demand, we can increase the demand for goods and services, and we do that by increasing the money supply. No one's prepared to talk about that because they don't know what they're doing, really, but that's what we should be doing first, and from that flows profits. And if you're getting profits, you can then use some of these small benefits.
Well, I know you've talked about this for a long, long time, and economists have discounted it, but just on the GST idea of extending the base of the GST to anything, including financial services, is that worthwhile?
Well, you wouldn't support an increase in income tax of, say, 5%. But of course, if you increase the income tax by 5%, you've got a tax-free threshold. But with the GST, there's no tax-free threshold. You're just taking 5%, scamming it off the poorest people in Australia, and disproportionately to how much they earn. So, you know, it's more unpopular.
But it's proportional to how much you spend, right? So who's spending the most on financial services products?
Well, in financial services, I think people are having bank accounts. The great majority of bank money comes from fees and charges, and people that have got bank cards and things like that. People that are in debt, really, that spend more money at a bank than someone that's got a lot of money, like in the account. You know. All
right, so that's a no to you flat out on any GST change.
Well, I think you've got to look at where we are. All the propaganda has been that the government finances are separate to the economy is going down the gurgler, but the truth is the economy is going down the gurgler because we're saying the government finances are bad when we're the third lowest debt country in the OECD.
Now, today you've produced a rather glossy brochure about your vision for Australia and your achievements so far. When you look at, well, it's nearly a year next week since the new Senate took its place, and a year ago you had all that power control of the Senate crossbench. Now you've got one Senate crossbencher left. Do you have any regrets about the last year?
Not really, because I think in the last year, if you look at the things we've done for Australia, and there was a cost at doing those things. You take D.O. Wang and myself, we've been in business, we can take pressure. But if you take two normal Australians that have had no political background before, and that they're put under the cruncher by the media, by all the lobbyists and things like that, they're bound to crack, you know. But we certainly did a lot of achievements. We saved $10 billion of social security cuts, stopped the co-payment, stopped the education, saved the RENA, saved the Climate Change Authority, saved low-income super for 2 million Australians. I mean, they're pretty big things, really.
Do you still talk to Jackie Lambie and Glenn Lazarus? How do you get on with them now?
Oh, quite okay. And their voting record in the Senate really isn't much different to what they were elected on. So, you know, things haven't changed for the Australian people. The government knows that. That's why the government has been pushing some of these measures through that were defeated last year.
Is the government still courting you in the way they were early last year, during last year? I mean, are there still the dinners? Are there still the briefings? Are there still...
Well, certainly we have dinners and things like that. But if you look at it realistically, our biggest achievement was that last year the government said we're in debt and in dire straits, right? Tony Abbott announces this year we're not in debt. That's not a problem. So we've changed, you know, that idea that they had. Our idea has survived and conquered. And that's the first step, really. And I think that the government's adopted that philosophy. So we're happy about that, and I think it's clear to the Australian people. The next thing, of course, is to hold our politicians accountable to actually achieve something for our community. That's what we need to do. But of course, politicians should only be in power for 2 terms maximum. We've got guys that stay there for 30 or 40 years, and many of them should still be in nursing homes. We need to turn them over and have new ideas for our country.
So will you apply that rule if it isn't embraced federally for all MPs? Will you embrace that yourself, 2 terms?
Yeah, of course. So I think 2 terms is enough for me.
So you'll go around next election.
Oh, you go around next election, but I think you've got to go forward for new generations. I mean, you've got to live up to the principles that you believe in. Being in politics should be about public service, and that's all you should be doing it for, you know.
And will you be running candidates in every seat?
Yeah, we'll be in every seat in the House of Representatives. The party will be, and in the Senate like we were last time. And
when do you reckon the election will be? Have you?
Well, I think what they're waiting for is the Prime Minister to get some popularity. So they're hoping Bill Shorten will make us stuff things up at the Royal Commission, so they can boost the government numbers up above it. Then they'll call one about October if they can, make it a double dissolution.
October this year,
if they can.
So have you pre-selected selected your candidates?
Yeah, we've got all our candidates ready to go.
They're all ready to go?
Yeah, we've got most of our candidates. We've got about, I think, 75% of the House of Rep seats ready to
75% ready to go.
Yeah, but we're working on the rest of the next month. But I think, if they can get their numbers above the Labor Party, they'll certainly go in October, November and go for a double dissolution.
All right, Clive Palmer, plenty to talk about between now and then. Thank you very much for joining us.
David,